and welcome for joining us. So we're going to have a look today a little bit about the effect of Brexit on innovation, and in particular on the funding of innovation, and the supply of labour for innovation as well. So we're going to look at current Brexit situation to start with, and then the importance of innovation and funding in Wales, followed by the types of funding that are likely to be available at the end of the transition period and previously, and the effect on IP and patents as well, and a little bit about a potential innovation strategy or what the things you should be looking at in your business. So just before we start that, just a little bit about me and about my company, Go Exporting. We're a specialist export consultancy. So I help businesses to launch into new international markets, everything from export readiness to strategy to building distribution networks around the world. And we've taken a lot of time to specialize in the Brexit transition period and helping clients to manage that process. So we're pleased to have been invited by Winning Pitch and the AGP program to present these webinars. So first of all, the current situation, where are we now and what's changing? Apologies if you've seen this previously, but in case there's anyone new that joins us. So officially, we've left the EU on the 31st of January 2020. So we're no longer an EU member state. And we're in this transition period until the end of this year, until 31st of December 2020. The government announced back in June there won't be any extension to that, so we can expect that the rules will change as from the 1st of January next year. But until then, we do remain in the single market and the customs union. But when we do leave, that will mean the end of free movement of goods and services and labour throughout the EU. We won't be part of that single market or customs union any further. And so we're trying to enter into a comprehensive free trade agreement with the EU. And the original deadline that Boris set was the 15th of October. Michel Barnier then said the end of October, and now we're nearing the end of November, and we're still discussing. So, but history shows that deadlines with the EU can be extended time and again, and there is, this possibility of a 12th hour agreement. The final round of discussions is supposedly in progress now, and there is renewed hope being reported that there are some issues that remain, as we'll see in a moment, but that they can be overcome. So, but whether there's a deal or not, there will be changes. And one of the changes will be that we'll no longer be able to rely on the free trade agreements that the EU has with other countries. So we have to enter into our own free trade agreements. And that's something that the UK is trying to do at the moment. And you may have seen the announcement about the Canada free trade agreement this week. So what are the biggest issues with the negotiating a free trade agreement with the EU? This does relate to innovation, because one of the areas is this so-called level playing field. The EU wants the UK to legally commit to maintaining at least current standards in environment, labour and climate change. And importantly, for this topic, the EU state aid rules should apply to the UK as well. Some of the innovation fundings, for example, R&D credits, are classed as state aid. So the EU is looking to try and control the amount of state aid the UK government can give to research and development, which we're saying we don't want to do, and we should retain full autonomy. So that's one of the main stumbling blocks of the negotiations in this free trade agreement. And there's also problems with fishing quotas, as we'll have seen on the news. We're trying to find a potential solution to that. Bloomberg has suggested that one suggestion that may get agreement is what's called zonal attachment, where quotas relate to where the fish are found, not historical fishing grounds. So we'll wait and see. But the key difficulty in the negotiations is going to be on the state aid as far as innovation is concerned. As I say, because R&D tax credits are classed as state aid. So I've just been reading actually this morning that it's reckoned that we're 95% of the way there towards an agreement. And there are still these stumbling blocks, these areas of issues, but there's some suggestion that we may enter into what's called a transitional agreement. So we'll enter into a free trade agreement, but certain elements of it will be open to negotiation even after the deadline. So things like state aid and fisheries maybe will be pushed back a little bit, or they'll allow some kind of negotiation later on to just to make sure we get a deal away by the deadline. And let's hope that we do get something through. Well, what's changing? As we said, we'll no longer be, excuse me, part of the customs union or the single market, and customs declarations will be required for all shipments in and out of the country. We'll become a third-party country to the EU, and as we mentioned earlier, we'll lose all access to EU free trade agreements. So unless there is a free trade agreement, we'll fall back onto WTO rules, which, as we can see there, some of the potential duties are quite high. So that's something that we really don't want to get involved with if we can avoid it. Duties could have a very big impact on the economy, and you know, as we can see there, and would therefore restrict investment, potentially investment in R&D. On the other hand, it could lead to innovation in order to develop value added for products and services. So we, you know, we find ways of making our products attractive to the market. Another thing that's changing, which is specifically relating to research and development, is no free movement of labour anymore. You know, there's going to be restrictions on free movement, and that could affect R&D in terms of attracting people with the right skills into businesses, into universities, and so on, in order to you know, be able to supply the brain power that we need for that research and development. At the moment, we're still questionable about access to European research and development programs. At the moment, we still have access to Horizon 2020, for example, but we'll look at this in more detail a little bit later. So next, a little bit of a look at innovation and funding in Wales, and how that's going to be affected by Brexit. In general terms, research and development, research and innovation generates returns for the economy. You know, economic growth generates taxes and high quality public services, and research and innovation helps to generate that growth in the economy. Wales has a proud history of research and development. If we look at, just going back to the last point about generating growth in the economy, half of economic growth in the last 50 years in the US is said to come from scientific and technological advances. And in the UK, 50% of productivity growth between 2000 and 2008 was due to innovation, according to the government. So businesses that consistently invest in research and development have been shown to be 13% more productive than those that don't. And so it's a critical factor in improving our economies. So Wales has a very proud history of investing in research and development, with a mix of funding coming from UK research councils, from EU research funding, which we'll look at in a bit more detail, from the Higher Education Funding Council for Wales for educational establishments, and of course from the Welsh Government and charities also. 79% of EU funding in Wales for research and development comes through actually structural funds. And the government's invested around 340 million since 2014, which is 20% of the EU structural funds that have been received in Wales in that period. And as a total, Wales is receiving only around 2% of the total UK R&D funding. So Wales is not really receiving very much from Horizon 2020, for example, not as much as the rest of the UK. And the structural funds that Wales is benefiting from will actually come to an end at the end of the transition period. We'll no longer be able to claim money through those structural funds because they're specifically for EU countries. So leaving the EU, or the end of the transition period, will have a disproportionate effect on Wales in terms of R&D investment, especially, as Visage only received 2% of the overall UK R&D funds. So it is an area that is of great concern and interest and focus for Welsh Government. Therefore, the government has put forward some specific objectives to help focus policy, and one is to replace EU funding with UK funding, and that was promised by the government and in the Leave campaign in the referendum, that that no one would be affected by leaving the EU, and that funding would remain. We're also looking to negotiate full access to Horizon 2020, which is coming to an end, but Horizon Europe, its successor, and the Erasmus programs, so that funding is still available within the UK. We also want ongoing access to the European Investment Bank loan finance, and a research-friendly migration system which allows quick fast-track visas, for example, to bring skilled workers into the UK for innovation, for research and development. So this is looking at some next slides, looking at the areas where of investment over the last few years in Wales on research and development, innovation. As you can see, it falls into four main categories. There's the life science and health, low carbon energy and environment, advanced engineering and materials, ICT and digital. And those are key areas that that research and development across the UK. We've done some research with local authorities in the whole of the UK, and some of these areas are key areas. Digital economy and environment are specific areas that a lot of investment and time has been put into to make improvements in the UK. So what are the potential implications for Welsh R&D if the UK withdrawal from the EU? As we've seen, there's the potential for, well, the loss of structural funds and competitive funds from the EU. Those will no longer be available. These will affect all of the UK, all UK regions, but Wales will be disproportionately hit by structural funds. For example, the University of Wales receives significant funding from this source. So it is an area that we definitely need to be concerned about. There'll also be increased barriers to recruitment of EU staff, and potentially damage to access to international research collaboration, which again is key for some of the cutting edge research and development that goes on. And there'll be potentially reduced numbers of EU research students, and reduced outward mobility opportunity for staff and students from the UK to go to other countries, unless we get unrestricted access to these EU programs, which again is part of the negotiations which are going on at this moment in time. So now we'll have a little bit of a closer look at innovation and funding, and how that's going to be affected at the end of the transition period. So we're going to look at UK funding as it stands, EU funding as it stands now, startup funding, which is sort of private investment in technology, and then as I say, the effect of Brexit. And given the current climate, we'll also have a look at the potential effect of COVID-19 and support that's available for research and development from the government in this time. So how is innovation funded in the UK overall? So the umbrella organisation is called UK Research and Innovation, UKRI, and they're responsible for a whole host of different research councils and organisations which help to fund grants for innovation in the country. So there are 7 research council grant areas, for example, Arts and Humanities Research Council, Medical Research Council, Economic and Social Research Council, Engineering and Physical Sciences Research Council, Biotech and Biological Sciences, Science and Technology, and finally Natural Environment Research Council. So under the umbrella of UKRI, each of those research councils hands out grants in their specific areas of interest. We then have Innovate UK, which is the industry-facing arm of grant funding in the UK. And they run funding competition to help develop your ideas. And typically they're funding for technical or market feasibility studies, proof of concept and prototype development, for example. So they're the ones that most companies will be going to looking at Innovate UK. You've got a very good website and you can sign up to announcements and regular updates on the latest fundings that are available, the latest competitions, as they call them, that are available. And then you have the Research England, which is giving grants to higher education, and the devolved governments equivalents of those. So you have the DFE, Department for the Economy in Northern Ireland, Scottish Funding Council, and as we've seen, the Higher Education Funding Council in Wales. So they help to fund and provide grants for educational research and development. And finally, you have the National Academies and Departmental Research and Development, which are more government bodies. So they're independent national academies for delivering government priorities, basically. So they're focused on areas that the government is wanting them to look at. And departmental R&D is basically general knowledge and evidence for policy decisions within government. So the main areas for business would be Innovate UK, which, as I say, provides these grants and competitions for funding for innovation. The other main way that innovation is funded in the UK is through research and development tax credits. You can claim up to 33.35% of R&D spend against corporation tax, or as a cash repayment in some circumstances. Approximately 3.5 billion per year is claimed in this way, and it benefits around 40,000 businesses at any one time. But it is open to all companies. There are 2 schemes, one for SMEs and the large companies scheme, which is known as RDEC, which stands for Research and Development Expenditure Credit. So, those are a key area that you need if you're spending anything on research and development, on innovation, that you can look at to get direct support from the government. But as we've seen, this is one area of contention in the free trade agreement discussions. Total R&D spend is around 37 billion per annum, which is just 1.7% of GDP. But the government is intending to increase that, so their spend budget for next year, 2021-22, is £12.5 billion, and they're aiming to get up to 2.4% of GDP by 2027 and 3% thereafter. We have to say that Germany already spends 3.1% of GDP, and the OECD country average is 2.4%. So we're still lagging behind a little bit in those areas. We'll look at that in the Brexit effect of that a little bit later. So EU funding for innovation. This is, we're looking at current funding. So we can claim the EU structural and investment funds, for example, the European Regional Development Fund, the European Social Fund, And as we saw earlier, that's one of the main ways that the Welsh Government has funded innovation over recent years. In fact, 79% of the funding comes from these funds. And that's going to change because they will no longer be available. And then we have Horizon 2020, which is the EU fund for innovation throughout the whole of the EU. And the UK is actually the second largest recipient of grants through Horizon 2020. We received, up to the end of 2019, 5.7 billion, which is around 15.2% of all the grants that were issued by that organisation. So as well as providing grants, it supports international scientific partnerships, and provides access to large international research facilities and joint infrastructure, which are so important for detailed research, and provides fellowships for researchers to spend time working abroad. So it's a very important scheme, which we're part of now, but we need to make sure we're part of its successor, Horizon Europe. Then we have the Erasmus scheme, which is basically for exchanges of people and expertise. So there's 1 billion expected allocation for the UK over its period up to 2020. And as I say, this supports university exchanges, work and vocational training placements, and provides international opportunities and cooperation between universities, schools and colleges across the EU. So again, it's a very important programme which helps to foster innovation. An important area of funding for innovation in the UK is startup funding. We attract vast amounts of venture capital funding for our startups into the UK, a disproportionate amount compared to the rest of the EU. So, for example, in 2019, we attracted $13 billion worth of venture capital innovation funding for startups, which was more than France and Germany combined, and actually the third highest globally after the USA is the number one. But by the end of 2019, the UK had 77 startups with values of over $1 billion each, and that's twice as many as Germany. So as you can see, this private funding, innovation, venture capital funding is an extremely important part of the way that we fund innovation in the UK. So what is the Brexit effect? Firstly, if we look at research and development tax credits, procedural changes are unlikely. The way you claim them now is likely to remain the same. So there's no issues there. But once we've left the EU, as we said, tax credits are classed as state aid, and that is one of the big areas of discussion within the free trade agreement. And the Prime Minister Boris Johnson and his now former chief advisor Dominic Cummings believe that the EU rules governing subsidies and other state aid to industry, that they get in the way of Brexit, post-Brexit Britain becoming a science and technology powerhouse. So they've been dead against any kind of restrictions by the EU on our ability to invest in research and development. And that was one of the reasons they threatened to walk away from trade talks and to break the UK treaty commitments earlier in the year. We want to avoid any kind of EU rules limiting our ability to spend on research and development, because the EU does put limits on spend to keep a level playing field throughout the whole of the bloc. But we want to have no limits, but that will definitely be subject to the free trade agreement that comes in. So it's a good way to boost the economy post-Brexit and post-COVID-19. So again, that's why the government wants to have freedom to be able to do this ourselves. But in some ways, it's a strange area to be a sticking point, because in fact, In relative terms, the UK still underfunds research and development through the government. In fact, we're only 11th in the EU in expenditure as a percentage of GDP. UK, we've generally chosen to provide less aid than other members, for example. We spend far less on subsidies to companies. In 2019, it was only 0.34% of GDP, whereas Germany was 1.45% and France 0.79%. So we're spending less than other countries. Although, as we've seen, the government is targeting to increase our overall spend to 2.4% of GDP by 2027 and 3% thereafter. But the EU target is already 3%. In 2018, as an example, the European Commission approved a plan to give 1.8 billion euros of public funding to the semiconductor industry around the EU, because their research and development costs are the highest in the whole of the tech field. France committed to contributing as much as 355 million euros, and Italy chipped in another 524 million, and Germany gave 820 million euros to their semiconductor industries. But in the UK, we only sought to permission for 48 million euros, and we still haven't paid any of that out. So in some ways, this is discussion about state aid is about principles and politics, which is fair enough, but it does appear to be a discussion in principle rather than reality of our spend. And it's partly a political hot potato as well, because the idea of an expansive new policy strategy for the tech sector, it makes many Conservatives quite nervous, because they're worried in many ways about picking winners because it's risky. You know, a lot of you may pick the wrong companies to back and so on. But you know, the government's big governing vision is to rebalance the UK economy to provide jobs and opportunity all around the country. But you know, we've got to say that many of the voters for the new government came from the north, so it could well be that decisions are favoured in certain ways. So we have to look at you know, R&D tax credits. It is a stumbling block in the free trade agreement, but it is a great way of funding your innovation. So what about EU funding? As we've already said, there'll be no access to EU structural funds after the end of the transition period. As we saw earlier, 79% of Welsh Government R&D investment is from this source. And you know, negotiations are still ongoing regarding Horizon Europe, which is the successor to Horizon 2020, Erasmus project, and Euratom research and training programs from 2021 to 2027. Euratom is a research program for nuclear research and training, so it doesn't affect many people, but it's one of the schemes in Europe. So our government aims is full access for UK organisations to Horizon Europe, but as a minimum collaborative, you know, open to that it wants to, the opportunity to enter into projects which are available to third countries as part of the Horizon Europe programme, but best would be full association with the programme. As regards Horizon 2020, which is still running, funding is still available to UK businesses if you've been involved in this. So if you've already got an application in, but funding for that will only be awarded after the end of this year, then funding will still be available. Same for projects which finish after the end of this year, funding will continue over the extent of the period of the project. So there's no need to be, you know, concerned about that. Same with the Horizon 2020 Green Deal, which is another part of the programs there for research and development into green issues. And the deadline for bids is the 26th of January next year, but that still applies to UK companies because it's part of the current agreement. So you will be able to put in your applications for this funding if that's an area of interest for you. And you know, we're also still able to look at European Research Council opportunities. Maris-Sklodowski-Curie actions, opportunities. So these are European Innovation Council, Accelerator grant funding. These are three of the main sort of funding areas within the Horizon 2020 area. And there were some concerns when we first looked at leaving the EU, and after the leave vote, we might not have access to those funds in this transition period. But as it happens, we were able to negotiate that. So you are still able to look at that. Although some of the application dates have now passed, I think it was in October, but you can see there if applications were already in, then funding will be available. UK applicants can lead or join a consortium of organisations from different countries to propose a Horizon 2020 project. So that's still available to us at this moment in time. But as I say, apart from the deadlines that we've mentioned there, this will change as from next year. But the government has pledged to fill any gap in funding if there's no agreement reached with the EU. But we wait to see if that will actually happen. And if you recall, earlier on, we said that that is one of the key areas that the Welsh government is trying to hold the UK government accountable for, to make sure that they do honour that pledge. The Brexit effect is more than just on funding for research and development. Collaboration with EU research centres and universities is critical for future developments. So there are real concerns about a lack of potential talent coming into the country. 50% of UK research publications, if you look at them, actually involve international co-authors. So that collaboration with EU research centres and universities is a very important element in our innovation opportunities moving forward. We need to be able to maintain that. Also, post the transition, it may well be more difficult to recruit, more difficult to attract people coming from the EU. The government has pledged a fast-track visa system for scientists, but as yet we need to make sure that these things do happen, so that there's not a lack of people. There have certainly been cases where people have been put off coming to this country already, and EU nationals leaving the country. And we looked at in a previous webinar that 22,000 EU workers have left the NHS since the leave vote, for example. So it gives an indication of the thought processes, makes it more difficult to attract people. And there are also instances of UK companies, and certainly companies based in the UK but foreign owned, that are looking to move their R&D elsewhere, for example, into the EU because of these potential issues. South Korea is one area with one of the world's biggest investors in R&D, so that's become an attractive proposition for some multinational companies, for example. It's important that we do cover these areas. And the Erasmus program we need to have continued involvement in that program. That's important it's a 16.45 billion program aiming to reach over 4 million people for study, training, work experience, and volunteering abroad. So it's for movement of intelligent people and skills is an important program. And one area that is not being talked about a lot is whether the UK is becoming less of a gateway into Europe for international companies. UK, Asian, and others may not see the UK now as the route into Europe, especially if there's a reduced talent pool, the reduced amount of people, and that may reduce the overseas investment in startups in this country, which, as we saw earlier, is a very important element, a very important part of R&D and innovation funding for the UK. We've seen this with our clients, Go Exporting clients from the US and from South America and from Asia that are rethinking their strategy about whether they should be setting up in their European operations in the UK or into mainland Europe, into the EU. So it is a real effect that could well have an impact on our economy moving forward. The bigger immediate effect on the economy is obviously COVID-19. That's it's a real fear that with the recession that this is generating, the drop in the economy, that it will lead to a drop in research and development spend. So for that reason, the government has announced some innovation continuity loans to help companies continue their innovation, their research and development work. There are three strands to that. Strand one is to complete an existing Innovate UK project. So if you've had a grant or funding from Innovate, but you're struggling to complete it because you've been affected by Brexit, then there are innovation continuity loans available for you in that situation. Also, strand two is for a follow-on project to one that's been completed in the last 36 months. So if you've had funding, you've completed a project, but you now need to do the next stage, the second stage or third stage of that project, you can't do it because of COVID-19, then there is again the opportunity to apply for a government continuity loan. And also the last strand is strand three, which has just been announced, and that's continuing innovation activity that hasn't had any grants or government support in the last 36 months. So if you've got work that you've been doing that is on innovation and R&D, but you've had to bring that to a stop because of the current situation, then yeah, there is funding available for that as well, potential loans available for that. So that's all administered by Innovate UK. Closing date is the 13th of January. So, and there is around £210 million that's available. So it's worth looking at. You've got to be able to show that you're facing a sudden shortage or even unavailability of funds resulting from COVID-19. You've got to show that you can cover the interest payments and you'll be able to repay the loan on time, however, but that you are in need of public funding. If you can do that, then these funds are available to help overcome this current situation. So what about the effect on IP and patents post-Brexit? Let's see what the changes will be there. So in fact, with patents, we're not really going to be affected by Brexit, because you can apply for a patent through the European Patent Office, and that covers over 30 countries. But the Patent Office is not an EU agency. It works on geographical coverage, so through Europe. So there's no problem there in actually your patent still being valid, because it's a geographical coverage. So once it's issued, it still is valid in those all of those countries. And fortunately, patent attorneys based in the UK can still continue to represent applicants at the EPO, which is not the same with intellectual property, for example, where UK lawyers won't be able to represent it, European bodies, where it's an EU body. But one area where there will be a change is that we will no longer be able to be part of what is supposed to be coming, which is the EU unitary patent, and that's a new EU single patent for all countries within the EU, which is in advanced stages of being adopted by the EU, but it's not there yet, because there's been a lot of wrangling about it, as there often is with the EU. But what that meant was, if it did happen, was that you could make one application for a patent and it would then cover the whole of the EU. Now, we'll no longer be able to do that if it does ever come in, because we're not part of the EU, obviously. And one area of funding that is sometimes overlooked is what's called patent box relief. So if you do have patents, do have a look at whether you can actually claim tax benefits from that. There are preferential rates of tax on profits that are generated from patents. So it's worth having a look at that and seeing if you can claim a reduced tax on that. I think at the moment it's around 10% compared to 19% corporation tax. So it's almost half. So it's worth looking at. And by all accounts, it's an used element of potential funding or relief from investment in innovation. Intellectual property. So UK intellectual property laws will largely remain the same. EU intellectual property laws have largely already been adopted into the UK law. And what's going to happen is that 1.4 million EU trademarks and 700,000 EU designs will actually be transferred to comparable UK rights at the end of the transition period. So if you've got an EU trademark or an EU design, then the UK will be introducing its own UK trademark, but you'll automatically be transferred into that, so that you're covered for the UK and for the EU. But there are some important consequences. Registered EU trademarks and designs will no longer cover the UK. So, as I say, but you will automatically be create this comparable UK equivalent. So I would say 1.4 million of those, but you do need to check. If you've got a pending EU trademark application, you've got 9 months to apply for the comparable UK trademark after the end of the transition period, and to claim priority due to the fact you've got this pending claim. So it's a deadline to reach. So if you want to get the UK version, you won't automatically get it if your claim is still pending at the end of the period. There's a possible loss of IP protection if the UK and the EU fail to agree reciprocal protection. Hopefully they're going to do that within the free trade agreement. But this refers to international intellectual property created by each other's nationals and first published in each other's territories. And it could be resolved, in the free trade deal. But it does impact potentially unregistered designs and database rights. So it's a little bit more obscure, but there is a potential loss there. And then there's the Digital Copyright Directive, which the EU is looking to introduce. The UK government has stated that there's no plans to implement that. So the Digital Copyright Directive is designed to adapt existing EU copyright laws to better fit the digital economy. So artists, musicians, publishers, movie studios, record labels, and so on, owners of copyright that have complained that they've been hard hit by digital sharing services that are often illegal, and so that it takes away their profit potential through their creative works. So the Digital Copyright Directive is the EU's attempt to try and cover that. But we have said, as the UK's government has said, that it has no plans to implement that in UK law, which may come as a bit of a blow for creative industries, unless we come up with something different and similar. But overall, copyright is subject to international treaties, so general copyright will remain the same. So what does this all mean for your innovation strategy? Do you have an innovation strategy? I'll explain about the tractor photo in a moment. It's not just because I like tractors, but Brexit will create new challenges. There will be reduced access to traditional markets probably within the EU, and it will also create opportunities. There'll be new countries, new customers, and that does require potentially a product innovation strategy. If you don't already have one, new regions may have different demands on your products. For example, features, capabilities, and designs may be different. You may need a red switch rather than a green switch, and so on in different countries, because their rules and regulations are different. Simple things like that, but it may be more fundamental changes in some of your products in order to be able to sell into new countries. You may need new approvals and new standards. So all of this requires, an innovation strategy. So you need to. We recommend you review your capability for innovation. How much can you do at any one time? Which new countries can you look at? Because that will influence your sales and marketing strategy moving forward. There's no point saying, right, I'm going to go to the US. I'm going to go there tomorrow if it's going to take three years to actually develop the product which is suitable for that market. So you need to decide which countries and how fast you can work. So review your innovation capacity. This is a recommendation that we're giving our clients. But there's also opportunity through Brexit, to develop products which could potentially solve customers' Brexit challenges, for example, looking for gaps in the market. So there's an opportunity there. And one area is very rapid growth these days, advanced, accelerated technological change, is in data and digital technologies. And this is an area which a lot of companies are now looking at, and companies which you wouldn't expect maybe to be looking at this kind of area to develop their company and their products, and hence the reference to John Deere. As you know, they're a farm machinery manufacturer. They produce tractors and sprayers and so on. But they've extended their portfolio. They've invested heavily in innovation, research and development to provide a data platform for their customers, so that a farmer can sit on his mobile phone or in his kitchen, wherever he's got his computer, and see where all his machinery is, how it's performing, the spread rates, for example, outputs, yields, weather, how it's interreacted, how maximize results. You can look at the yields from different fields even, and which crops are more suitable to a particular field, and so on. So it's a great asset for the customers of John Deere. So it's adding value to that customer of buying a John Deere tractor, for example. And in that way, it reduces the threat of competition. So they'll keep buying John Deere. They're not going to buy a Massey Ferguson tractor next time just because it's a few thousand cheaper, because they want to keep that service, that level of information. Data and information is the new oil, as they say, and that's the key. So if you have that potential to add value to your products through technology, look at what your customers might be using your product or service for, and can you help them with that by providing some kind of platform or data that ties them in, basically. We have a client at the moment, an Irish company, who measures the retroreflectivity, so the brightness of lines on road markings. And there are lots of systems that do the same thing, but where they've taken the system further is by the software that they've developed to produce the reports and to analyze the data and to give much greater feedback to highways authorities on what their product is and what the measurements actually are that they're generating. So it's a real bonus for their clients, and is a real draw for people to buy their product from that point of view. So consider how innovation of this type could benefit your customers. Another area is process automation. This is a huge topic and potential for businesses due to leaps in technology and robotics and AI and so on. It's review the potential to automate processes and roles in your organization. It's particularly important if labor becomes scarce, as we discussed earlier. But we're not just talking about manufacturing or agriculture, as we've been talking about earlier. There's also opportunities across all business functions, really, for HR, sales, marketing, finance, etc. For sales automation software, for example, it can really cut down those menial and repetitive tasks, replace them with an automated strategy, which can improve the efficiency of your business and improve your engagement in many ways with your customers also. So, do you have an innovation strategy? It's worth reviewing that in the post-Brexit era, and how changes that Brexit's brought may change your innovation strategy. Do you need to look at product development for new areas, even labeling and so on? Any areas that need to be looked at to change your products comes under innovation to help you develop your strategy to be successful post-Brexit or the end of the transition period. So in summary, as from 21st of January 2021, we're out of the EU. Whether there's a deal or not, we don't know, but we hope there will be. The free trade agreement really is imperative for that continuity, particularly to allow us to continue being involved in things like Horizon Europe and Erasmus, for funding innovation and access to collaborations with European institutions and universities and so on. We need access to that skilled labour and researchers and scientists and students, so that we have that technology pool, that intelligence pool to draw on for our research and development, for our innovation. And like anything else, we need to plan for Brexit. We need to embrace the changes that are going to come and the new skills that we're going to create, and find ways of applying those in the world at large. We do need to review our funding options. Things may have changed. For example, we mentioned the structural funds no longer coming into Wales, so we need options. Of course, the government needs to come good on its promises, and make sure that it does fulfill any funding gap. And do check the IP status of any of your applications. Don't miss those deadlines that we talked about. And we do recommend that innovation becomes a core strategy, because it can affect your sales and marketing strategy as well. Your overall strategy, it's a core part of the business. And to end on a positive note, Brexit really is an opportunity as well as causing issues. It opens our minds to the whole of the world, and broaden our horizons, and the world is full of opportunities. Okay, thank you very much. I think if there's any questions, I hope that was of some use and of interest.
Thanks, Mike. Connie, any questions? I know Brian's joined us as well. I don't know if either of you want to come off your mic if you've got any questions or queries. There's a lot of info in that one.
Yes, the slides will be available afterwards anyway, won't they? I think.
Yeah, as soon as we get the AG3s, the digital signature on those sent back to us, then if they want the slides, we can send those over, not a problem there. Well, yeah, I think we're covered this morning then. So thanks, Mike, for giving up your time this morning.
Welcome. Thank you.
When do I see you next? On the
1st, I think it is.
Yes, it is. Yes. So we'll see you then. So thanks to Connie and Brian for joining us this morning. Thanks, Mike, for giving up your time, and have a good rest of the day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.
Cheers. Bye.